Hi, friends. Today we are going to be talking about the Galarian goddess known as Urgathoa. I might pronounce her name either Urgathoa or Ugathra. I actually think that Urgathoa is the correct pronunciation. But yes, I will go ahead and mention that her name is the title of today's stream. So if you want to see how it's spelled and see why I say it's probably Urgathoa, that's how it's supposed to be pronounced, you should just go and check out the title. Yeah. She is a Pathfinder deity of she's a Pathfinder deity of undeath, hedonism, and diseases. And she's actually a really interesting deity. I think that my camera might have just messed up for a second, but hopefully y'all were able to see my hand as I just mentally cited the three things that she's the goddess of. But yeah, she's a super fascinating goddess. She is one of the evil goddesses who might be worshipped by creatures who aren't especially evil just because of the things that she's associated with. But I'm definitely having a full day today. Her origin story is actually super fascinating. She is one of a group of pretty large deities who we know for a fact to be from Galarian, which, as I've mentioned in the past, is sort of assumed to be the setting where Pathfinder adventures take place. A hedonist is a person who pursues like physical desires and stuff. It's not necessarily sex, but sex is one of the things that hedonists are often thought of as pursuing. Basically, it's someone who likes pleasure in a wide variety of different senses and someone who likes to experience different sensory things. Once again, not just sex, but sex is often considered to be like one of the big ones. I almost said Galarian as in the name of the goddess. Ugathra was believed to have been born as just a regular mortal woman on the world of Galarian at some point in the incredibly ancient past, probably in the immediate aftermath of the Age of Creation. And she lived a pretty ordinary life. She was known, or at the very least, it's believed that she was a hedonist in life and that she didn't really care to obey the rules that other people put on her, which explains her origins. Because what happens when she dies is that she begins a journey down the River of Souls, which is the default thing that happens to living creatures in Pathfinder when they die, especially if it's immortal. When a mortal person dies, they begin a journey down the River of Souls over to the Boneyard and over to Pharasma's Spire, which is a thing that we've mentioned a few times in the past. But she was the first person, at least from Galarian, to muster the will needed to say no. So basically, she died and then said no to death, which I think is really cool. But when she was on her way to Pharasma's Spire, she said no, and she stopped herself. She left the line of souls that were going to meet their either like eternal reward or their eternal punishment, depending on what they did in life and what their beliefs were. And she brought herself back to Galarian. And when she arrived back in Galarian, she took her first steps as the world's first undead creature, and in that moment became a goddess. Presumably, she became a demigoddess and then over time ascended to the ranks of like real godhood, but effectively she died, she said no, and she came back. And lots of people thought that that was a mistake because she is blamed for a lot of different things. She is widely believed to be, and I think that this is like anti-Ugathran propaganda personally, for a reason I'm going to get into later. But she's actually believed to be like the source of undeath and disease. I think it's not true that she's the source of disease, and I have a reason for thinking this, but I'm going to get into that later. It's definitely true that she likes diseases, which doesn't help. She really likes it when people get sick, and one of the reasons why it is that non-evil people might worship her is if someone is a victim of plagues, they might be inclined to pray to her for reprieve, or it might corrupt their mind and make them into neutral or even evil people who like spreading disease. And once again, I personally think this is anti-Ugathran propaganda, but there is an adventure path where like one of the big Ugathrans that you meet is like, I'm going to create a plague that's going to destroy a city. And then Ugathra is like, lol, nice, and turns her into one of her kids, which is a thing that Urgathoa can do. It's not like actually turning her into one of her kids, but there's a creature type known as a daughter of Urgathra, which is what happens to a mortal priestess of Urgathra, who Urgathra really likes and is like, I want you to be around forever. And they like immediately die, and they become super cool, very powerful undead creatures. It's also worth noting that that is not like the most powerful type of undead that she can create. She can create an extraplanar entity known as a Pallid Angel, who is detailed for the first time in the Tyrant's Grasp, which is it's the final adventure path in Pathfinder 1E, and it's the adventure path where you fight against Pathfinder's Lich King. A Pallid Angel is like an even more powerful daughter of Urgathra, and they are also like really pretty. Whereas like daughters of Urgathra are like kind of pretty, but they're also like really freaky looking spirits. A Pallid Angel looks like a person with wings, and sometimes uses that to trick people, especially good people, into welcoming them into her home and then eating them. So yikes. But basically, there's some really cool stuff you should know about her history before we get into some of the other stuff. One of the big reasons why I think it's bullshit that she's categorized as like the origin of diseases is that her current home is in the plane of Abaddon, which is one of the outer planes. It is the neutral evil plane. So basically, if you were neutral evil in life, you go there. And you either become a daemon or you get eaten by daemons. But I'm telling you, this lady is a Taurus and also me. Jessica, you shouldn't want to be Urgathoa. It's not like a good thing. She's an evil goddess. Just because she's not a goddess of disease, I mean, she is a goddess of disease, but just because she's not the origin of disease doesn't mean she's not evil. She is a very bad lady. And we shouldn't be like her, even though she's really cool. So when she first died and rejected death, does humanoids eating humans count as cannibalism? No. In order for it to be cannibalism, it does have to be like someone eating a member of their own species, which she's cool with. Like, she's just like, yeah, cannibalism's fine. She's one of those people. So honestly, she is a lot like Jessica. It's kind of funny that Jessica's over here. It's like, this is relatable AF. But when she first died and rejected death, and she became a goddess of undeath and diseases and hedonism and all that cool stuff, she lived on the mortal plane for a really long period of time, and that was where she had her realm, somewhere in the mortal universe. But at one point, I love the comments y'all are making. At one point, she was approached by presumably the original Four Horsemen who killed the Oneo daemon, and she was asked if she wanted to have a realm in Abaddon. At the time, she was either with another deity named Xiphus, or another deity named Xiphus was also involved in the negotiations. Xiphus is a minor god of accidental death, and he's also an asshole. He's much more malicious than Urgathra is, personally. He commands his followers to cause people to accidentally die, and yikes. That's just a really big yikes that we're not going to get into. But both of them agreed to the terms that Charon and the other horsemen established. And it's not super clear why it is that the daemons wanted to invite these neutral evil deities of death in some form or another to their plane. But now Urgathra's one of those. Listen, I know a fair number of people who support cannibalism, y'all. It's not just Jessica. But yeah, Xiphus is a huge dick. Urgathra is a huge dick. And now they live together in Abaddon. Xiphus's realm is actually inside of Urgathra's realm. It is just a small little graveyard that is like a mockery of Pharasma's realm. And Urgathra's realm is just a bunch of cities on what is basically like an abyssal coast. And there she has a bunch of followers who just vibe and they like indulge in their baser desires. I've talked about the fact that like this is a deity who really just wants people to indulge in themselves and live a full life. She is an evil deity, yes, but she's definitely like not as malicious as some of the other evil deities that we've talked about. Like we talked about Rovagug and Zon-Kathan, both of whom are far worse than Urgathoa is. Urgathoa is only malicious in the sense that like if she wants to do something, she doesn't care who it affects. She's not going to go out of her way to like massacre people, but for instance, it says in her like description in one of the resources that she will kill the last living member of a living race just to see how its blood feels on her hands. And that's not very nice. Yikes. That's like super uncool. I'm honestly going back and forth on my own notes. I'm taking this super out of order. But it's worth noting that like if you are curious as to what she looks like, over on my Discord, I have shared an image of her. I shared it in a not safe for work art place because it's very scandalous. Urgathoa most commonly manifests as just like a lady with raven hair, and she's like largely naked, but her body is mostly decayed. So from her legs up to about her waist, there is no flesh. It's just skeleton. And then from the top up, you can see like her boobies and her head, and she's like super pale, and she also has like vampire eyes. I actually think that her artwork is like pretty cool, but it's definitely like not safe for work. So yeah, if you're a member of my Discord, you can go on my Discord. If not, for whatever reason, then what you can do is you could just like Google it. It'll be one of the first images that shows up. She is a very naked lady. She doesn't have a booty, Jessica. I'm sorry. Not all deities have booties. I mean, she technically has a booty, but like it's her bones. I think that we're doing this like super chill. But as I mentioned earlier, before she, God, I got very out of place. This is one of the few times I got distracted and it like really worked. I was talking about how I don't think that she's actually like the origin of diseases. And it's because Charon and like 3 other horsemen were involved with negotiating for her to come to Abaddon. And one of those other horsemen had to have been a horseman of the plagues, which are diseases. So basically, there have to have been diseases before Urgathoa existed. So that's the reason why I think that like this whole thing of Urgathoa being associated with diseases is anti-Urgathoan propaganda, which is weird because you don't need anti-Urgathoan propaganda. Pretty much any true story about Urgathoa makes her look like an asshole. You don't have to make up new ones. I honestly think that what actually happened was that there was like retconning that happened in the timeline. Just because like they've added so many details that sometimes there are continuity errors. So yeah, but that's one of the things that is really weird about her. I think it's really interesting. I'm looking through my notes. I have talked so much about like so many different things already that now I'm really out of place with my notes, but that's super fun. So now I'm going to talk about her relationships with other deities and other deity level beings. I think it's super interesting because she is the only like super official deity of undeath in the mainline Inner Sea regions pantheon. There are deities of death like Pharasma, and there are deities of like pain like Zon-Kathan, but there aren't ones that are actually like of undeath specifically like Urgathoa, which makes sense because they want like each deity to have like a separate portfolio. Her history specifically allows her to have really interesting relationships with Zora and Kabari, who are the demon lords of vampires and ghouls respectively. There are at times her homies, they are at times her homies, and they are at other times her rivals, just because all 3 of them are worshipped by undead beings of different sorts. She doesn't poo because she doesn't have a booty. Also, if she actually eats anything, it would just fall out of her, y'all. Like, if you look at pictures of her, you can see that she is like mostly just a head. So she eats, it would just go down and then just vanish. It would like fall to the floor. I'm not going to get super distracted though. So because she is not associated with specific forms of undead aside from the daughters of Urgathoa, it's really easy for her to be worshipped by undead beings of all sorts of different types. In fact, her like most valued worshippers are creatures like vampires and ghouls that are undead but can also spread undeath, as well as other things like wights. Y'all's comments are very distracting. She really likes undead stuff, and undead stuff really likes her. So the deal with creatures like Zora and Kabari, who are two demon lords who are specific to Pathfinder, and Orcus, who's like the big demon lord of undead in D&D, but also is a demon lord in Pathfinder, is that like they are generally associated with specific types of undead. Orcus is associated specifically with liches, but he's also not super popular in Golarion, and he's not ultra interested in Golarion, despite being like one of the most aggressive demon lords in Pathfinder. And just because of that, like the ones that have specific undeads that they vibe with are generally cool with Urgathoa as long as she doesn't step too close into their territory of vibing with different kinds of undead. Something that I was always really curious about is that mummies don't seem to be super associated with Urgathoa, which I always thought was really weird because mummies can spread undeath. And also they're intelligent undead, which is like one of the things that she really likes. All of the demon lords of undeath and different types of undead really like intelligent undead. There's no demon lord that's just like, hell yeah, man. I really like zombies or skeletons, just because those types of undead generally aren't intelligent. That's not always the case, though. There are other powerful entities that Urgathoa has like really cool relationships with. One of the really powerful creatures that she's really interested in is Nadiri, who is a powerful entity. I couldn't find like the specific kind of entity that Nadiri was, but she was a patron of the idea that love is eternal and also of romantic suicides. I think that she might be an Imperial Lord, but I'm pretty sure she isn't. Imperial Lords are the generic, like super do-goody types of higher beings that aren't like deities or whatever. They're just like angel lords and Ankaran kings and queens, stuff like that. And Nadiri and Urgathoa are actually super like interesting. They have a really weird friendship. I personally don't like that, but I do think that the idea is very interesting. It's also worth noting that Shaylin, who is one of Nadiri's homies, really hates Urgathoa at all. Shaylin is the goddess of beauty, love, and art. And she sees Urgathoa and she's like, man, fuck that lady. It's really weird that like one of the lesser evil things that Urgathoa is associated with is a creature like Nadiri. She also dislikes Iori's followers, but not Iori himself. And Iori is the god of perfection and enlightenment. And he, like her, was a human who ascended from being a human into being some sort of deity. In his case, he achieved enlightenment and then he spontaneously became a deity, which is really weird. His whole thing, he's basically like the Buddha type deity of Pathfinder. We're probably going to talk about him because I think his religion and like all of the stuff that his peeps do is really interesting. But he is not a huge deity in the Inner Sea region. He's worshipped in other parts of Golarion, even though he is a Golarion-esque deity. She really doesn't like his followers because his followers practice moderation, which she hates, but she likes him because she thinks he's sexy. And she wants, like it's implied that she wants to jump his bones in the books where they talk about like the relationships between the gods, although that's not necessarily the case. It could be literally that she wants to taste him, which in her case could very well mean cannibalism. I mean, I have no idea. It's just really weird. But yeah, your comments. The comments are very distracting today, but I am doing my best to power through. So one of the things that's really interesting to me about the Ugathran faith is that worship of Ugathra often begins as a slippery slope. Typically speaking, oftentimes what will happen is that people will go to Black Widow. Oftentimes what will happen is that people will go to a place that they don't necessarily believe is like an Ugathran place, a place where they can experience all sorts of sensual experiences and all sorts of like sensory experiences. And then those places will actually be organized by an Ugathran. Some examples that I can think of off the top of my head are places like drug dens, orgies, and feasts. And oftentimes, like, that's what worship of her looks like. And people will start to, like, they'll go there as, like, I guess, relatively normal in the context of Pathfinder peeps who just want to experience a one-time thing. And the hope of the Ugathrans is that they will be able to get them hooked somehow, whether it's through, like, an actual addiction or, like, the idea of addiction. These people are assholes. like the priests of Ugathra are really huge dicks. And it's really important that people understand this. In a lot of ways, with a deity who's not like extremely actively evil like Ugathra, in some cases, their worshippers actually seem like more problems than they are. So I want y'all to understand that like the stuff that we're talking about when we talk about evil deities are like really dark shit. But basically what will happen is that over time, the Ugathrans who are in charge of these locations will try to get the people who are there into darker and darker stuff. And over time, as their tastes become darker and darker, it becomes easier to talk to them about the Ugathran faith, which is all about breaking taboos, living life to the fullest, and also eventually the idea that death is not the end. Because the end goal for Ugathran priests and priestesses is to become undead beings and also to turn other people into undead beings as well. You want to be more problems than the god that you worship? I mean, oftentimes, like that's definitely the problem with Ugathrans. I can think of a number of different ways in which an Ugathran doesn't necessarily need to be like super evil, especially if it's one that's not a priest. But yeah, it really sucks. It's also worth noting that the churches themselves tend to be matriarchal. So typically speaking, it's lady priestesses who do a lot of really cool stuff. If you wanted to be like the coolest priest or priestess that you could in the church, you should try to be an undead being of some sort, have the ability to create and command other types of undead, and hopefully be a lady. Typically speaking, the actual like tendency towards matriarchy isn't something that's like, it doesn't need to be the case. It just so happens that oftentimes you can, it's just so often that like the highest priestesses tend to be priestesses. The end goal of most mortal worshippers of Ugathra who eventually become priestesses is probably to become a daughter of Ugathra, which, as we mentioned, is a specific type of undead that's super cool and kind of sexy. That's not necessarily the end goal of all types of Ugathran priestesses, but if you are an Ugathran priestess and you're just like, yeah, like my goal is to be the coolest member of the church that I can be, you probably want to try to be a daughter of Ugathra. That's probably your end all goal. In the adventure that I talked about earlier, where one of the like only members of Urgathoa that you see in an adventure path is there, that particular person is a problem because she, one, is creating a plague that probably won't kill people, but like is ultra contagious. And the purpose isn't really to kill people, but it's like to leave people weak and shit. And when you find her and you kill her, it turns out that Urgathoa was like, I had my eyes on that one and I really liked her disease and I was going to turn her into a daughter of mine. Probably, but now since you killed her, I'm definitely going to turn her into a daughter of mine. So she gets warped into a daughter of Urgathoa, because when you're making someone an undead, it doesn't matter if they're a corpse. And then she fights you again as a much stronger creature. So that sucks. You actually come across a few other Ugathrans in the Pathfinder adventure known as the Tyrant's Grasp. And in that case, they're not like daughter. Oh no, they are daughters of Urgathoa. You fight like several daughters of Urgathoa throughout that adventure path. Yikes. But the first one that you find is a ghoul, which I think is really interesting because like ghouls are like much beloved members of the Church of Urgathoa. And you don't often get to see that in the adventure paths. Normally, what you see when you come across the Urgathoans, you're either fighting a mortal lady or you're fighting a daughter of Urgathoa. You're not usually fighting like normal members of her faith or types of her faith where like it's not something that's super common. She's a much beloved goddess of vampires and ghouls alike, who both have their own types of demon lords, as we discussed specifically before. But it's really neat to me to see something like a ghoul be one of her homies. Can they ever get to a point beyond resurrection? So that depends on what specifically you're asking. If you're asking if a human can, yes. If you're asking if a daughter of Urgathoa can, the answer is also yes. But killing a daughter of Urgathoa is one of those weird things. Like, there's some types of things that to kill them and actually put them down, you have to do more than just kill them. And daughters of Urgathoa are one of those types of creatures, just like liches are. We talked about liches before, but a lich is basically a very powerful type of undead that has the ability to create other lesser kinds of undead and has something called a phylactery. So even if you kill it, it will just reform at its phylactery. Urgathoa is fond of liches, but she's not like ultra fond of them. They're not like her main peeps. She is very non-discriminate when it comes to undead. If you are an intelligent zombie or skeleton and you wanted to worship someone, you would be perfectly welcome worshiping Urgathoa, basically. I think that's one of the reasons why I tried to do that, Tria. Like, one of the reasons why I like doing this is that even though Pathfinder is a different system than 5e, a lot of stuff gives people ideas, even though you definitely can. You definitely can convert stuff from one type of system to another. But yeah, a phylactery is a soul in a jar. Yeah, it is kind of like a Horcrux from HP. It's also worth noting that liches are found in Lovecraft's works. Same with worms that walk, which are another really common type of undead. That's basically like a soul that managed to possess a whole bunch of worms and uses them as like a sort of creepy ass necromantic body. I hate that loser, man. But yeah, liches and worms that walks are also both in Lovecraft's work, which is something that's really interesting. I like how Jessica likes Shub. She's like, yeah, no, I hate Lovecraft himself, but Goat Mom's really cool. Yeah. So now I want to talk about one of the ways that like non-evil people can worship her. There's a number of contexts in which a non-evil person might begin to worship Urgathoa. And some of the easier ones for me to think of are like if you are a farmer who's ever been afraid of starvation and you want to always be full, Urgathoa is a deity you could turn to. If you're someone who wants to experience the fullness of life in a wide variety of like physical contexts, once again, not just sex, though that can definitely be a part of it for people who are sexual. Or if you are an artist who likes doing taboo artwork, then all of those are contexts in which you could worship Urgathoa. And you could be someone who's not necessarily evil, even though like all of these things are things where being evil would obviously make sense, or becoming evil is also a possibility for some of these people. If you are a necromancer who is like a medium who just wants to use spirits and talk to spirits and use them to like give comfort to the living, that's a way that you could become a worshiper of Urgathoa who either becomes evil or who manages to fight against like evil thoughts and beliefs. I'm talking about all of this stuff for a reason, because in a little bit I'm going to switch over to a slight tangent and I'm going to talk about how it is that someone can be one alignment, even a deity can be one alignment, and over time they can switch to another. So, like, I promise that I'm bringing all of this stuff up for a reason. But as I've mentioned previously, if you are, say, a victim of a plague and you are afraid of diseases, you could worship Urgathoa out of fear. And I think that that's really interesting. So now we're going to talk about alignments. So everything in Pathfinder has an alignment. Everything that is intelligence, no matter how powerful it is, if you have above a certain level of intelligence, you have an alignment. If you have below a certain level of intelligence, you're probably just true neutral, just because like everything has an alignment or whatever. There, I can't see all of the camera, so I'm doing my best. And if you worship a deity and you think that it shouldn't be that alignment, but you wanted to change its alignment over time, you can work towards that. And I think that's really cool, because that's actually what happened with one of my favorite deities in Pathfinder, Noctula, the Redeemer Queen. If you are a member of my Discord, obviously, I talked about Noctula earlier today. She is the succubus queen, and the first succubus who in first edition Pathfinder was a chaotic evil deity patron of assassins, lust, and darkness. And in second edition, she became a true neutral, not demon, true goddess of refugees, artists, outcasts, and passionate people. And I think that's super cool. And the way that it worked for her specifically was that there was a subset of her believers known as the Church of the Redeemer Queen, who over time convinced not necessarily her, but a wide subset of people that even though she was a demon lord, she was taking a path similar to the path taken by Lamashtu, who ascended by killing other demon lords and absorbing their power, and became a true deity, even though a chaotic evil one, of taking powerful things and killing them, and that she was going to rise above her evil alignment and become good. It's incredibly important to note that in Noctula's specific case, even though many members of Noctula's faith as a demon lord back when she was an evil lady of lust and stuff believed in her, fought against her other believers, and were granted spells by her. I think that's a really important part of all of this. They were supported by her. And she was really chaotic, and that she was like, I'm going to give you my official seal of support by giving you magic, but if you die, you die. So, I mean, good luck in this basically faithful version of the Hunger Games. And over time, the people who were members of the Church of the Redeemer Queen were not only successful in convincing people to like join their faith, Noctula was successful in gaining enough power to undergo a true apotheosis. So she ascended from being a demon lord / demigoddess to being a true deity. That's actually kind of similar to like the basic system in My God story, where it's like, yeah, you start off as a demigod, as a little baby god, and then over time you become more powerful. And as you become more powerful, the stuff that you're associated with generally becomes more set in stone. So basically, there's a couple of steps if you decide that you want to change the like way that your religion works. First of all, you got to get a whole bunch of your friends together, and they also have to agree to have the same basic set of beliefs as you. You guys have to appeal to your god or goddess and get spells from them, and then you have to hope that your god or goddess becomes more powerful over time and decides to take on all of that cool stuff. There's no reason to believe that like the mortal aspect of all of this stuff is necessary, but it's incredibly important to know that just like how it is with lots of different RPG faith systems, the ways that someone worships a deity does affect their interests. It doesn't affect it like super relevantly in Pathfinder, but like no, deities definitely care about what their worshippers care about. And there's lots of reasons for that. And there's lots of power to be drawn there. So I think that's super interesting. And if you ever want to have a campaign where you try to redeem an evil god, there are ways that you could go about it. It would take a lot of stuff, though, because there are incredibly few instances of someone who started off as one alignment who is like an ultra powerful being becoming someone of another alignment. I can think of a few instances. All of the Queens of Knights, which are also peeps that I've talked about over on my Discord. Basically, if you like Pathfinder lore, you should probably join my Discord. I don't have a link here, which is fine. You can find it over on my Twitter. But I talk about Pathfinder lore a lot because I'm a big nerd. The Queens of Knights are all creatures who were either good or neutral, who became evil and fell to hell. And that's one of the only instances where this has happened. There is also a redeemed succubus who appears in a very famous adventure path. She had an encounter with Desna, who's the chaotic good goddess of dreams and stars. Loth is the dark elf goddess of spiders and also like the head of the dark elf pantheon. There are other dark elf gods and goddesses, but there aren't that many. And all of them are dominated by Loth. And also, they're not important at all in 5th edition, aside from Elastre, who is a super cool, chaotic, good goddess of freedom, redemption, and like the world above. We'll talk about D&D lore at a different time. I just wanted to like chill there for a second, just because Loth is super neat. But yeah, if you do want to have a campaign where you redeem an evil god, it is possible, but God, it's difficult. I think it would be really interesting if someone was like, I want to redeem Rovagug, the evilest of all evil gods. The one evil god that literally everyone was like, hey man, we're going to fuck that guy. And not in the nice way. We're going to send him into prison. Scary. Getting back to Urgathoa for a little bit, I'm going to talk about her holy text, which is called Serving Your Hunger, and was written by the first ever anti-priest of Urgathoa. An anti-priest is not an anti-priest, an anti-paladin. An anti-paladin is a paladin, but just evil. And Urgathoa's first anti-paladin was named Dasan, and he wrote a book called Serving Your Hunger, which is a book that, among other things, talks about cannibalism. It talks about sacrificing stuff so you can experience other stuff. And it also talks about people who are just like, hey, I want to have a friendly interaction with a vampire, a ghoul, a wight, or other intelligent types of undead. The book is like, got you, fam. And also, I want to become a vampire, ghoul, or a wight. And the book is also like, got you, fam. It's a very cool book, and Dasan is like celebrated as like one of the great heroes of the Urgathoan faith. It's presumed that he was a human, but I can't actually find any confirmation that states explicitly what his race is in the lore. I actually really like Serving Your Hunger. It's also worth noting that Urgathoa is the first evil goddess we've talked about that has like their own specific holy text. Holy texts are actually really common throughout the faiths and Pathfinders, but for some fucking reason, there's a bunch of evil gods that don't have them. Rovagug doesn't have one. Kython, there's this weird demon lord named Kython, whose name I can't spell off the top of my head. He is a demon lord of like fungus and parasites, and he has one that's like a living book. They're all really weird, and I don't know why they felt the need to make them this weird. But Urgathoa's, now we're going to talk about the servants of Urgathoa. I'm doing better at being a little bit less distracted now, so that's very exciting. Urgathoa has a herald known as Mother's Maw, which is a huge ass floating skull, and it's an enormous, giant-sized floating skull that is surrounded by It's surrounded by flies, and it just sort of vibes most of the time. It's actually smart enough to talk, and it knows how to speak a whole bunch of different languages. But basically, if you ever encounter it and you're not an Urgathoan, it's probably going to eat you and or turn you into an undead, because that's what it does. priests and priestesses of Urgathoa summon their herald, the Mother's Maw, to just sort of destroy stuff, or also in some cases to ask for advice when it comes to like cooking and stuff, which I think is really neat because the skull is hyper intelligent. It's just that most of the time it doesn't feel like talking. Most of the time, if it sees someone, it would rather eat them than talk to them. But if you can get it to talk to you, it's more than happy to share information on how to cook stuff, especially if that stuff is people. For some reason, there's like a really big motif in this faith about eating people. Don't know why that is. To be fair, Christianity also has a weird fixation with eating people. Her servitor race, which is not really a concept that I've talked about that much, but basically it's a race of extraplanar entities that you can, that deities are associated with and that generally serve them, are known as the Sacrovaults. I will actually go ahead and put that spelling in the comments just so people can type it out. Sacrovaults. I pronounce it the best that I can. They are enormous horse-sized houseflies that oftentimes wear vulture skulls for their heads. They're not very intelligent. And what they like to do is they like to eat people and they like to spread diseases. And people who worship Urgathoa summon them and have them around as, in some cases, mounts if they're like small peeps themselves, but usually as scouts and as guardians, because they're able to just sort of roam around. And if you feed them, they're basically able to last forever. I actually think that they're one of the cooler concepts of like servitor races that there are. If you're curious, the servitor race for Rovagug, which is the deity that I talked about, not last time, but the time before last time, are a type of Qiploth that basically just vibe and try to eat Rovagug. And sometimes Rovaguggians summon them to try and eat their enemies. They're not really that interesting, which is the reason I didn't talk about them before. But they're not actually like a servitor race for Rovagug. It's just that like Rovagug doesn't really have his own servitor race, just like he doesn't really have his own herald. We all call the Tarask the herald of Rovagug, but like only a little. That's only because that's like the closest thing that Rovagug has to a herald. I have a feeling that like the Tarask would be more than happy to fight Rovagug if you gave it the opportunity. There isn't really any love lost there between Rovagug, who is an intelligent creature that just wants to break stuff, and the Tarask, which is not an intelligent creature that also just wants to destroy stuff. There are some, I guess I'll just go ahead and talk about like ways that you could use Urgathoa in your campaigns. The adventure paths to date have used Urgathoans largely as a pretext to throw daughters of Urgathoa at you. Daughters of Urgathoa oftentimes have unique abilities that are related to the diseases that they're associated with or to the undead that they're associated with. There is, I cannot be her, sorry, Jessica. Just immediately responded to that. There are like a number of different daughters of Urgathoa that have been encountered throughout the adventure paths. And it's really boring to me that that's like largely the only way. I can be her in the game, but I have no intention of doing a Pathfinder campaign yet. I want to. Pathfinder is very complex. Pathfinder is a lot to run. That's the main reason why, even though I like the Pathfinder lore more than I like the D&D lore, I haven't actually run a Pathfinder campaign yet. I have run one in person several years ago, back when I was a Pathfinder baby. But I haven't run one online just yet, although that will change eventually. If you want to use Urgathoa, there are a number of ways that you could use her. I actually kind of like the idea of her being the central antagonist in the campaign, just because she does a lot of like really selfish shit that gives people pretext to move against her. You could say that like you come across a lost kingdom where the only people left are people who've been victimized by Urgathoa. Or you could say that you find a record of someone who was a member of a now extinct race that was killed by Urgathoa, just because there's so much stuff in like the lore of her being like, hey, you're an extinct race, fuck you. So it's easy to use her as an antagonist. If you want to be more sympathetic, you actually could try to make a moderate faction of Ugathrans that worship her in a number of like really unique ways. You could create a campaign where some of the central protagonists are people who worship Ugathra moderately. People who are just like, I don't want to die of starvation. I don't want undead to ravage my home. I don't want disease to cause my face to waste away. You could make people like that into a moderate cult of Ugathrans in much the same way as the Church of the Redeemer Queen was originally a sect of people who really did their best to twist beliefs about Noctula into like good beliefs and stuff that doesn't hurt people, which was really impressive given that she was a goddess of assassins. So if they can do it for a goddess of assassins, you could probably find people who want to do that for a goddess of undeath, especially if you focus in on the idea that undeath is an escape from death as opposed to like a corruption. Lots of people who want to use Ugathra in her more traditional aspect will focus on the fact that Ugathra is an undead creature and that undead creatures are corruptions of life that refuse to die. That's the way that Pharasma and, to a lesser extent, Sarenrae view Ugathra, which is kind of frustrating for me because I think that there's a lot of fun that you could have with the idea of someone who's like, I want to be an undead, but I don't want to be an evil undead. I want to be an undead who just vibes. I think that's a really fair and also a really fun idea to explore. To some extent, things like the mystical Odyssey of Theros have tried that a little. There's also in 5th edition D&D, for the people who are more into D&D than they are into Pathfinder, there's also the idea of like the Balnorns, I think that's what their names were, which are like elven liches who are actually really good guys who are just like, we want to defend our communities and we don't want to be reincarnated, but we want to defend our communities and be like eternally vigilant peeps. In both 5th edition and also in Pathfinder, there are a few instances of mummies not being evil, which is another really interesting idea. So being undead does not necessarily mean that you are evil. Although if you become undead, generally speaking, you have to work really, really, really hard to rise above those evil urges. If you want to see an example of an Ugathran society where worship of Ugathra is not something that is like hidden and something that's like illegal, you could go over to you could go over to the state of Jeb, which I'll go ahead and just put in the comments or in the live chat, which is a entire society that is ruled by necromancers and by the undead. I think that's a really interesting concept, but they're also an ultra evil society where like the living are viewed as like trash that should be thrown away, which really sucks. It could be very fun if you're just like, yeah, we like the idea of unlife and stuff and living forever, but we don't like the evil. I think that's a character concept that a lot of people could have fun with. Jeb. That is the name of the necromancer who built the society and also the society. Jeb is a famous necromancer who was like one of the world's strongest necromancers. He was the person who, if I remember correctly, defeated Arasani, who was Aradin's original herald. And he made her into an undead lich queen known as the Harlot Queen, which is kind of fucked up. I don't like that name in much the same way as I don't like the Whore Queens, which is the name that mortals gave to the Queens of the Night that I talked about earlier. We are going to do a whole live stream on the Queens of the Night because there's 4 of them and because their lore is interesting enough that we could talk about it for like a hot minute. But yeah, we're talking about Jeb the Society right now, Adam. We're not talking about Jeb the Man. We will talk about Jeb the Man later, eventually. Jeb the Society is very interesting because it's a society of like just people who are hoping to become undead and where undead can just sort of vibe. which is a really fun concept. And that's one of the ways that you could make like a campaign centered around Urgathoa that is actually really interesting, because you don't have to focus on the idea of like, oh yeah, Urgathoa is a really bad lady and we should stop her. That's not necessarily the way that you have to handle her. You can do pretty much anything you want if you know enough lore and you can justify it. If I were going to make an Urgathoa-centered campaign, I would have a few different ideas. There is a really fun idea that I kind of like, where you could try to be creating a campaign where the goal is to prevent people from dying forever by becoming undead. Obviously, this would probably be an evil campaign. I'm using air quotes like really strongly here. But basically, that is actually a thing that's happened to an entire society of people in Pathfinder's ancient history. I think the planet name was Eox. I'm putting some of these dumber names in the comments so that way people can spell it. I think that was the planet name, and Eox is either one of the planets in Galarian solar system, or it's like one of the nearer planets, and it was inhabited by a society that got super fucked up. And one of the last things that the society did was they were just like, all right, guys, we're going to make our smartest people into bone sages. And bone sages are a specific type of undead that's pretty powerful. I don't remember them being quite as powerful as like the Daughters of Urgathoa, but their whole thing is they're like really big skeletons and they can like turn other people into undead. I really like them. They feature in both Pathfinder and in Starfinder, but I can't remember if Eox is like the name of the planets. God, these names are dumb. I think Eox is the name of the planet. I'm actually going to look it up because I have a resource in front of me where I can look that up right now. It is the name of a planet, and it is the final planet from, it's the like most distant planets. Actually, it's not the most distant planet. It's the 6th planet out of 8 in Galarian solar system. And Bone Sages were members of a society that got wiped the fuck out that once inhabited Eox. Very cool stuff. Not the focus of today's video. We'll talk about it later. We will do a video on the solar system of Galarian, and on the solar system Galarian is in. I like butchered English so badly that even I paused for a second and I was like, wait a minute. But basically, their whole thing was their planet got super fucked up, and like pretty much all of the living things that once lived got turned into undead. In both Pathfinder and in Starfinder, it's a planet made up of undead peeps. And I really like that. I think that's a super fun concept for a planet, just to go ahead and see like what sort of creatures you can create. But you can have a campaign like that where you're in a world that's not necessarily Galarian, although it could be Galarian, and you could be like, all right, so we're all going to die really soon, and we want to avoid that. So we're going to become undead. And the way that we're going to do that is we are going to do something creative. And there's like a number of things that you could do. You could go over to Charon, who is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. He is the specific horseman of like death by old age. And he's known for this sort of thing. He's known for like entire planets making deals with him and then getting fucked in the end. So it could be like, maybe instead of going over to Charon, we could actually go over to Urgathoa, who probably wouldn't do us that dirty, because Urgathoa would probably be super happy to have an entire planet worship her, which is not the case anywhere in like Galarian's universe that's been detailed. Even in Eox, which I don't know how to pronounce. Even in Eox, like they don't necessarily worship her. I'm not going to draw the Bone Lady here and now. That's something that requires more artistic skills than I have. I would draw a stick figure and then I would just make her extra thick on top. That's what my drawing would look like. Charon is a super fun guy in the sense that he's a huge dick and he's also extremely powerful. So it's very fun to have campaigns where like he's the central antagonist, especially because, as I've talked about earlier, he's one of the oldest characters. He is one of the oldest characters that still exists in Pathfinder. He is probably billions of years old. It's very fun. But yeah, if you wanted to do some other stuff with Urgathoa, you could have a campaign where the goal is to try and kill her, which I actually think would be fun. But I've talked about this before. Paizo doesn't like it when people try to kill deities, so they generally don't give. I've noticed, Tria, I've noticed the pattern of what kind of deities you like. They have a general habit of not giving higher beings stat blocks. There are literally hundreds of higher beings in Pathfinder. I've tried to guess the number before. I've said in one place, I think it's like between 150 and 300. It's almost certainly higher than that, because there are entire resource books where there are hundreds of these assholes who are summarized like really succinctly, and they don't have stat blocks. So it's just like, if you want to fight them, don't. You will die. And I don't like that. There are some that you can fight. There is a Pathfinder adventure path where at the end you fight several demon lords. You don't fight them like back to back, but you fight them like at the end of one adventure and then at the end of another. There's also a Pathfinder adventure path where you fight two of the great old ones. I'll go ahead and say one of them. You fight Haster, but like you fight like a really nerfed version of Haster, like an avatar-fied version of Haster. You don't fight like Haster himself. But most of the time, Pathfinder is just like, we're not going to let you fight these guys officially. If you want to homebrew it, you definitely can. But we're not really going to tell you that much about what you need to include, because like, if you want to fight a true deity, so someone who's not a demigod, but is just a straight up god, there are a few traits that you would need to give them that you give like all members of the god species, but they don't outline what those traits are. Whereas if you fight like a demon lord, there are a list of traits that you could give a demon lord based on the fact that it is a demon lord. If you want to fight an archdevil, you actually can do that. All of the archdevils, aside from Asmodeus, have fully detailed stat blocks. They are the only group of higher beings where like every single member of their kind that is named, that has ever existed, with the exception being like Typhoon, who got his ass super killed. Like they all have fully detailed stat blocks. It's beautiful. I love it. I'm such a big fan of the fact that if I wanted to fight Despater or Barbados, then I could, and it's great. Also, hey Randy, I hope you're doing good. You're coming in probably closer to the end of the stream. I'm more riffing at this point, but we were talking about the super cool goddess of undeath in Pathfinder earlier. If you want to check it out later, you can. This has definitely been one of my more like scattershotted ones, which is fine. I really liked it. It's much more natural than like doing everything. It's much more natural than like trying to be super focused on a live stream, because live streams aren't really the place for that. But yeah, I actually talked about the person who killed his ass earlier over on my Discord, obviously. Capri and I were having a conversation about Ragathiel, who is an Imperial Lord, the generic good higher beings of righteous wrath and stuff. And he was the one who actually went in and like super murdered Typhoon pretty early on during his life. And yeah, I'm happy to be on, Randy. I'm probably also going to live stream tomorrow, but I don't think it's going to be on YouTube. I think it's going to be on Twitch. I want to get into doing regular Skyrim streams. It's fine that you've missed the last couple of them. I've started just talking about Pathfinder and stuff, and I really like it just because I really like Pathfinder. But yeah, let's see. What are some other fun ways that you could use Urgathoa? Well, there's an adventure path where there is a tribe of giants who are led by an undead giant who is herself a devotee of Urgathoa. And this is one of the like weirder instances where there are like Urgathoa is worshipped as a straight goddess of undeath. That's the only thing that Urgathoa is worshipped as by these giants. And the giant lady is just like, hey, I'm going to die, and I would really not like that. And Urgathoa is like, I got you, fam, and turns her into a Grave Knight. And a Frost Giant Grave Knight is ridiculously difficult to fight against. That is a very powerful creature, which makes sense because this is one of the like last adventures in that specific campaign. It's very fun. If you really want to fight Urgathoa, or if you want to take her on as like the main antagonist of a campaign, I think one of the funner ways to fight her would be to do a campaign where you talk about like diseases and stuff. I've already said that like my whole thing with Urgathoa and diseases is kind of frustrating. I don't really like that just because it feels like they're just like, we're going to be mean. We're going to say that this lady is the source of all diseases. And I'm like, you did her dirty, Paizo. But yeah, I want a powerful creature to tell me I got you. Listen, that's what being a warlock is like in D&D. In D&D, if you're a warlock, a very powerful creature looked down on you and is like, you look like you could use some magic. Here you go. The equivalent in Pathfinder to warlocks are witches, which I think is really interesting, but like it doesn't transfer over extremely well. And like trying to do witches, like you don't have like the same cantrip. Being a witch in Pathfinder is only a little like being a warlock in D&D, which is really interesting. Among other things, witches, unlike warlocks, are like real magic users. In D&D, if you're a warlock, you are not a real magic user. I know that that's kind of mean, but like I play as a warlock in most of the campaigns that I'm in, and let me tell you, most of the time I'm not using magic. In Tria's campaign, which I'm a member of and I'm a warlock in, I'm usually healing people with non-warlocky abilities, or using Eldritch Blast. Those are like the big things that I'm doing. And Eldritch Blast is a cantrip. But in Pathfinder, the way that they handled witches was they were just like, we are going to give you hexes. And hexes are actually extremely powerful. They are like the arcane... D&D warlocks get this thing called like arcane gifts in Latin, but I can't remember what the exact word is. And it's like a once per long rest spell that you can use above a certain spell slot. Witches in Pathfinder get that, but all the time. They can do that pretty much whenever they want, and their things are called hexes. Hexes are just spells, and I think that's very funny. I don't know why they call them hexes. Most of them are just like, you can use this spell, but we don't want you to call it a spell. We want you to call it a hex. And that is hilarious. Thank you, Zal. Mystic Arcanium. That's what they're called. But yeah, I like playing warlocks, but let me tell you, if you think that as a warlock you're mostly going to be using your magic, like your spell slots, no, you are not. You are mostly going to be using your abilities. Unless you are doing like what Ben is doing over in my campaign, where he's playing a Phalok. Phaloks sometimes use their magic. I feel like Phaloks are probably the warlocks that are like most inclined to use their magic. As a Celestial lock or as a Hexblade lock, you are not going to be using your spells. You're going to be using your other super cool abilities and also probably whatever other class features you have from the other classes, because I don't know anyone who's like, I'm going to be a Hexblade Warlock and I'm just going to be a Hexblade Warlock, or I'm going to be a Celestial Warlock and just a Celestial Warlock. That is not a thing that happens. The only instances that I can think of where this rule is probably not followed is like one-shots. In a one-shot that Zal did, one of our buddies, Drag, was a super high-level Celestial Warlock. And in that campaign, I was also a Warlock, but I don't remember what kind of Warlock I was. I wasn't a Fiendlock. I remember the trio was a Fiendlock. I was an Archfey Warlock, and that was actually really fun. That was a campaign where we saved the world. I say campaign, but it was actually a one shot. Listen, Tria, I'm not multi-classing the shit out of him. I just really like the beginner warlock stuff, and then I don't like anything else about being a warlock. I really like being able to like heal people a bunch of times. I'm not going for 3 different classes. I might, if we keep the campaign going long enough, I might become a rogue, which I actually think would be really fun. Either a rogue or a paladin, but if I became a paladin, that would imply that I want to fight more, and I don't want to fight more. I very much like doing the stuff in D&D that is not that. And also, Capri, it's funny that you say that, because there's actually a type of warlock in D&D where your patron is a genie, and at the end of it, you can cast wishes. It's so good. Oh my god. That's one of the few warlocks where it's worth staying like that kind of warlock, like all the way through to the end. I think that one, and the great old one, and then the deep, like the deep warlock, the one where it's like you're vibing in the ocean. Those are the few where it's like worth actually really sticking with it. It's not really worth sticking with it if you are like a celestial warlock or like a hexblade warlock, both of which are really, really, really good classes and subclasses. The problem is that their like final abilities are like trash, which really sucks. That's the main reason why I don't feel bad when I'm over here like, yeah, no, I'm going to be a warlock for a few levels, and then every other level is going to be a cleric, because my character in Tria's campaign is the healer. I'm also the only healer in that campaign, so I'm just like, I want the ability to heal the fuck out of people. If you're injured, I want to look at you and be like, you're not injured. But yeah, Adam, you wish for infinite wishes. These are D&D wishes, which are a little bit different. It's not like you are a genie. It's like you serve a genie and you get the 9th level wish spell, which is a spell that basically lets you do whatever you want. There are some things you can't do with it, but basically at that point you're just like, man, if someone did something bad, I really wish they hadn't did that bad thing, and then the wish comes true. It's also the only way to take out the world, take out the Tarrasque in older D&D. You, I wish for infinite genies. I need to drink some water. I was dehydrated. Let's see if there's any more fun stuff over in Urgathoa's thing before I get ready to go to bed. Not her bed, before I get ready to go grab dinner. Her chosen weapon is the scythe, which is actually really neat. I really like that. So there actually is a really cool thing that I didn't talk about. So if you are an Urgathoan, as in if you are a worshiper of Urgathoa, and you are a member of one of her churches, the ones that are properly organized anyway, are divided into 2 castes. The higher castes are known as the Gulas, which are like priests and priests' friends and family, and then the famished. And yes, that is the Grim Reaper weapon. She's also not the only person associated with Safs, but she is like one of the big ones. And the famished are like initiate members who are trying to do like, it's basically like being in a fraternity and like being hazed. That's what it's like being a member of the famished. And then if you're a member of the Gula, you are served by the famished. And I think that's really fun. It's not like the most important thing in the world. Yeah, I had to check just to make sure I was right. But her chosen weapon is the scythe. She's not the only deity whose chosen weapon is the scythe. I'm pretty sure the chosen weapon for Xiphus is also a scythe, but it might be a staff. I know that there are also like a handful of demon lords who are associated with scythes as well. I think that there's only like 1 or 2. But yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and start to get ready to go, but there is another minor demon lord or like almost demon lord type entity that is associated with the undead. His name is like Merlixnry or something, and he is a huge asshole who's like, I'm going to collect corpses, they're going to be part of my collection. And he's what's called a nascent demon lord, which means that he is like a creature who's stronger than a Balor, which is the strongest type of demon in 5th edition D&D and in Pathfinder, but not as strong as a true demon lord. And being a nascent demon lord means that you like have a unique form, and it means that you are able to do stuff like you're able to command a portion of an abyssal realm, but you are not quite able to command an entire abyssal realm, which for some reason is one of the big requirements in Pathfinder. It's like, yeah, you're not a demon lord if you can't control an abyssal realm, and if you were a demon lord, you can stop being a demon lord if your power atrophies long enough, and you can go back to being a nascent demon lord, which is ridiculous. Like, it's so weird that there's like such a structured thing for demon lords. I'm actually going to look through my like books, which I have digital copies of, and I'm gonna see if I can find that demon lord's name. It's only going to take me like 2 seconds because I know exactly what book it's in. I just have to go and find it. You only got a 90. You got a 97% on your demon test. You needed a 100 to pass. Go back to school, you not quite nerd. We're really losing the pot, but it's fine. Let's see. We are come on. I'm just looking through my resources. So his name is. Oh, I was right. Aha! I actually also said his name almost right too. His name is Menixir, and he's known as the Coffin Groom for reasons that I'm not really going to get into, but you can imagine. He is an asshole who loves the undead, and I hate him very much. He's gross. His like specific stuff is grave robbing. That's like the thing that he's super into, and he's an asshole. Fuck this guy. Some of his worshippers actually do appear in like one specific adventure path for like 2 seconds. And I think it's really funny because most nascent demon lords actually don't get that much love. There is one super minor exception with Tree Razor, who is the son of one of the people I talked about before. And he is he's a unique almost demon lord who got his ass kicked to the mortal realm, and he's living in Galarian next to Kunim, which is the kingdom of the elves. And all he wants is to like take over the mortal world and also become a true demon lord. And his specific stuff is the corruption of nature and pollution. I'm gonna see if it says his dad's name. It's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and spell this because this is ridiculous. It's Kaiths Vusung, and what a fucking name. So that guy is a Qiploth lord who became a demon lord. And that means that he was a Qiploth lord who vibed for a while, and then he started answering mortal prayers. And he was like, mortals give me power, and I like power, and I want more power. And then over like millions of years after doing that, he became a demon lord. And that is the origin of like 6 different demon lords. They all started off as these fucking galaxy brain monsters that were just like, I don't really like having to fight all these demons, but the strongest demons are the ones who listen to mortals. What if I listened to mortals and I started answering their prayers? And apparently the problem with that is that like mortals, when you start answering their prayers, they want more stuff, and that feeling of greed corrupts the person who's answering it and turns them from Qiploth lords, which were like the proto-demons, into true demons. And it's all very dumb, objectively, but that is like the actual A to B process by which someone goes from being a Qiploth lord into being a demon lord. It's also something that's like really curious is that some creatures that became demon lords but weren't originally are also creatures that weren't demon lords in D&D but became demon lords after being something else. One really good example of this is Dagon, who in Pathfinder was also a Qiploth lord originally, who started listening to prayers and then boom, became a demon lord after greed, I guess, infected him or whatever. And in D&D, he was I can't remember. It's a Tanari. It's an Oberith. That's what it is. in D&D, they have the same, like, there was some type of thing in the Abyss, and then that type of thing in the Abyss got kicked out. And a new thing is in the Abyss, rule as, like, Pathfinder. But in D&D, it was the Obrith Demon Lords who were in the Abyss originally, and they included people like Mishko the Wolf Spider, the Queen of Chaos, and Dagon. And over time, those people either died or like became Tanari, which are the new type of demon lords. Tanari are like what the Balors are, what the Succubi are, although that's not really clear in D&D because it's not clear if Succubi are demons or devils. There's a really weird like continuity error for some reason between like the editions, where in some editions they're demons and in other editions they're devils, or like shadow demons or like wrath demons. Basically, in D&D, if you're a demon, you're probably a Tanari, but you might be an Obereth. And if you're an Obereth and someone looks at you, that's really spooky. And it like drives them insane, which is exactly the same ability that Quiploths have in fucking Pathfinder. It's like if you look at them and you like fail, I think it's like a wisdom check, then you become really spooked and you develop like a new phobia, and it's really dumb. Fortunately, like it's basically the same story for Dagon in both D&D and in Pathfinder. In Pathfinder, Pazuzu was always a demon lord, but in D&D, I think Pazuzu was an Obereth who became a Tanari over time. Pazuzu is one of the ones that we've talked about before. He's like a really hunky bird man who has like the face of like an eagle or something. It's really dumb. And he grants wishes in D&D, but then in Pathfinder, he's just like, if you're not going to help me against Lamashtu, you can go fuck yourself, and I'm going to stab you. It's all very dumb. I do think that we'll probably talk about Pazuzu in his own video, just because Pazuzu is like a whole thing. If we do talk about Pazuzu, who's one of my favorite demon lords, I probably would do a video just about Pazuzu, because it's like, here's what Pazuzu's like in D&D, and here's what Pazuzu's like in Pathfinder. And it's really weird how different these things are. But yeah, I've had a really fun stream. Today's was definitely a little bit more chaotic than it usually is, but we talked a lot about Urgathoa, and now y'all have like more information on how to make sexy undead people, and also probably some ideas on stuff you can torture your own players with. You shouldn't torture your players with them, especially if I'm one of those players, Tria. But I really like doing lore streams just because like I know so much about these sorts of peeps, and I like sharing what I know, and it's very fun. I am going to go ahead and let everyone go so that I can go and grab some dinner and stuff, but I hope that everyone has a really good night. And we're probably not going to be doing our next lore stream on a Sunday this week, between all the stuff that was going on in like my personal life and also all the stuff that was going on in like the real world. There was so much going on that there wasn't really a good night for me to do the stream, but I really like doing these sorts of streams, so I wanted to sit down and be like, okay, I'm still going to do it, even if it's not the most convenient thing for me to do. So I'm glad that y'all were able to come out and that we were able to talk about sexy undead people and hedonism and also demons. I wouldn't be surprised if my next stream is probably going to be about demons, just because like I really like the bad guys in Pathfinder a lot more than the good guys, which is part of the reason why we've talked about the apocalypse. We have talked about the bringer of the apocalypse, and now we've talked about the goddess of undead creatures. So basically we have an evil lore thing going on, and we're going to stick with it. But I hope that y'all have had a fun time. I'm going to talk to you later.